special time. People are striving to find peace and clarity. So a lot of things concocted.
People coming from a good place wanting to inspire because we're scared, like you say, a place of desperation, wanting to say, oh, don't fear, the golden age is right around the corner. Hey folks, it's Sam, and as you can see, I'm here with Mas Vidal Maheshananda, Director of Dancing Shiva School of Ayurveda and Yoga, and my good friend, who I don't get to see enough in person anymore, but I'm glad to be hanging out with you in this virtual space, talking about an incredibly important topic. It's always important, but particularly now, the Yugas, demystified the clear map of cosmic time, cutting through fantasy and false chronology. Welcome, Mas. Great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you, Sam, and wonderful to have a discussion on this fascinating and very important topic.
Yeah, and particularly now we're in a very transitional period with these eclipses in Pisces, Saturn moving into Pisces, all kinds of things. And there is a lot of renewed, I'll say the word scuttlebutt about, is this the beginning of the golden age? And is it all of these kinds of things are going on now? Mas and I have been doing this and researching this stuff for decades. You can see here, Mas is the author of 2 books, Sun, Moon, and Earth Ayurveda, and then the Evolution Revolution, where he talks about this cosmology quite a lot. I've also am the author of 2 books, and I've been also talking and teaching on these things really for decades. And so we're not coming from a position of, oh, I just heard about this or whatever. And we're going to be breaking down the technical aspect of the Yugas, how they were reimagined very thoughtfully, and how we can know for sure the age that we're in and where we're going. Mas?
Yes, absolutely. I think this is such an important time to be speaking about this. And the point that you make, that there's a lot of discussion about a new era, a new change, or a very special time where everything in the world is going to change for the better. This is really a bit sensational. And it comes, I feel, from a very desperate cultural place where people are really striving to find some sense of peace and clarity in their lives. And so there a lot of things inevitably are concocted when there's that kind of demand. So I'm glad to be here.
Indeed, yeah. And we've seen online, and I've done a few posts and articles lately about people coming from a good place wanting to inspire others because we're scared, like you say, a place of desperation, wanting to say, oh, don't fear, the golden age is right around the corner, and throwing around even things that don't make sense. The Kali Yuga is ending and the Sat Yuga is beginning, but that's not even how the Yugas work. That's not even the right sequence. These are well-meaning people. This isn't to be mean to anybody, at least most of it. Some of it is just, I'm not really sure, but we'll leave that out of it. But we're just going to start with this first part of the presentation here. Is, as it says here, sensible, fascinating, and easy to follow, the real story of the Yugas, or ages. Yugas just mean ages. And it says here, in recent decades, New Age interpretations of the Yugas have sparked interest, but also led to confusion, particularly with claims that we're already in the Sat Yuga, or that it is starting now, or that Kali Yuga will last for thousands of more years, hundreds of thousands of years, or that the Yugas are just symbolic and we just get to say, in my opinion, it's this. Again, this is another thing where people don't even understand what they are. And while often well-meaning, these ideas usually overlook the clear structure found in both the ancient texts like the Vedas and subsequent corrections, as well as observable and social and historical patterns that show clearly what Yuga we are in. As you can see this diagram, which we're going to be looking at. So to dig deeper, in the 19th century, the confusingly large numbers associated with the Yuga durations were sensibly corrected and adjusted by enlightened teachers like Sri Yukteswar. And Mas is going to also give a fascinating backstory about all of that as well. His model was grounded in astronomical precession, the precession of the equinoxes, and it reveals a stunning alignment with human history, scriptural timelines, cosmic timelines. So this is how we know, not just that he went in and changed the numbers. And again, we're going to show this and talk about this, but how it's not just a sort of capricious random rejiggering, how it lines up with everything. And not even just from Indian, but also from the Mayan long count calendar and other cycles of time and history that we can easily observe. So in this presentation, Sam and Moss are going to lay this out in a very easy to understand and see framework. And Moss, would you like to add to that overview?
Basically, I would just say that the synchronicity of these events, the mathematical calculations, the whole practical nature of these cycles is important, even though there are some that embrace is referred to as a longer Yuga cycle. It's not a cycle that you can apply and that makes practical sense in human life, in the world of time and space. The Yuga cycle that we're going to discuss and give much more clarity on is Yukteswar's 24,000 years cycle, and completely synchronizes and lines up with human life. And it really gives us a great map and a guide to live by and to be, fortunately, inspired by at this time.
Exactly. There's no reason for that desperate clinging to, oh, the golden age. Everything's okay. Again, we're in it, and actually the news is better. That's always the thing when I see these kind of desperate attempts to sprinkle fairy dust over our graves. First of all, you're not in the grave, so there's no need for the fairy dust. And truth is more inspiring than a comforting fiction that's going to then crash and burn. As you can see, even just all of these big numbers, I have these big numbers here, but you can see the biggest thing to understand is that there were different definitions of years. There were human years, there were years of the gods, there were years of Brahma, etc. And the way that Yukteswar, his mind was basically and very simply aligned with the rishis as well, so he could see very clearly what the timelines were. As it says right here, in the holy science, Sri Yukteswar reinterprets the Yuga cycle found in the Puranas. Instead of vast timescales of millions of years, he proposes a 24,000-year cycle based on the precession of the equinoxes. He teaches that the durations in many texts were misinterpretations of divine years multiplied by 360 to get human years. For example, they would say that it was a certain number of years, 1,700,000, or no, it would say 4,800, and then it would get multiplied by 360, and then turn into these gigantic numbers. Which, again, we already know this isn't workable. These aren't human timescales. So this is why when we hear this notion that the Kali Yuga is 432,000 more years, we have a sense of desperation. And it's no, forget that. It's the golden age now. So again, when we misunderstand it, this is what gets us into these desperate clutching situations as well. So it's just a very simple math issue. And so according to Yukteswar, and as you can see here, these are the calculations. Again, the Sat Yuga is actually 4,800 human years, 1,728,000. I'm sorry, 4,800 Deva years is what was explained in this way. Once you do the math, it's actually 48,000 years, not 1,700,000. I'm sorry, 4,800 years, not 1,728,000. So again, according to Yukteswar, the rishis originally described a 24,000-year cycle, which human consciousness rises and falls. And this cycle is split into ascending and descending arcs of 12,000 years each, and it includes the Kali Yuga, 1,200 years, Dwapar Yuga, 2,400, Treta, 3,600, and Satya, 4,800. And Yukteswar taught that we're currently in the ascending Dwapar Yuga, 1700 AD onward, not in the Kali Yuga, as had been previously believed. Many also still believe this, but it simply doesn't make sense within a human time scale. And you'll see down there I have where it says the Vedic tradition recognizes varying measures of time based on levels of consciousness. Again, this is the human year, Deva year. These are levels of consciousness. And the yugas are based on that Deva consciousness in humans. And as the texts were recompiled during the descending Dwapara Yuga of later Kali Yuga, drawing from Treta Yuga wisdom, again, so we'll look at that on the time scale, errors naturally crept in, especially in math and astronomy, because these are very technical sciences. And a clear mind like Sri Yukteswar can see these inflated numbers as mistranslations of less refined interpreters. In fact, I also see these errors when I look into astrological texts. And I'll give you an example of that because I've been looking and doing research into the zodiacs now for decades. And even when I go back and look, for example, in the Rig Veda and the Yajur Veda, all of the cosmology and the calendar was all laid out. Even back in the Vedas, they had all of this laid out. All that wisdom was there. But there are niggling errors that are in these texts. And you know that they weren't errors because the people didn't understand what they were doing. They were errors because as the texts were updated and scribes would go back and re-update them because they were written on things like palm leaves and stuff. So they got to be recompiled. Errors would creep in. So, for example, in the Rig Veda and Yajur Veda, there's a section called the Vedanga Jyotisha, which is really the source of Vedic astrology. And you can see it says here, and I have highlighted when the sun and moon occupy the same region of the zodiac within the asterism of Dhanishta. At that time begins the Yuga, which is a 5-year cycle, not these long cycles, but a 5-year cycle, the synodic month of Magha, the month called Tapas, which is a calendar month, the bright fortnight of the synodic month of Magha, and the northern course of the sun or solstice. So what this is saying is that the new moon after the solstice begins the new year, the synodic month of Magha, the calendar month of Tapa, and a 5-year cycle. So they're talking about the sun and moon coming together. And then in the next line, it says, when situated at the beginning of Shravista segment, the sun and moon begin to move north. When they reach the midpoint of Aslesha, they begin moving south. Because I'm used to looking at this, and Moss probably as well, if he would see this, he would see that moon part is a mistake because it's not the moon moving north, it's the sun. So this doesn't mean that the Vedic people didn't understand. It means that this is an error. And probably the person who updated this at the time, and it's in it's in every translation of the Vedanga Jyotisha, you see this sun and moon. It's in the text because this is an error that crept into the text. And in fact, we even know because later, about 1,000 years later or so, when Varaha Mihira updated the texts at that point, actually in the Yuga cycle, he even quotes this very same stuff. He says, there was indeed a time when Dakshinayana began from the middle of Aslesha and Uttarayana from the commencement of Dhanishta, for it has been stated so in ancient works. You just saw the ancient work. And then he says, at present, Dakshinayana, the southern course, starts from the beginning of Cancer, this is a tropical sign, and the northern course from the initial point of Capricorn. This actual fact goes against the old statement and can be verified by direct observation. But notice he doesn't say the sun and moon. Right. He's corrected the error because he sees it. And of course he saw it because it's in all of those texts, but he saw that there was an error. So this is really nothing new, where we go and look at these texts and then update them and correct what you would call errors. So even people like us, even we can see it when you know what you're looking for. So it's very sensible and natural that these mathematical errors crept into the Puranas. And by the way, most of the people don't realize, but most of these books were written during that time. They were mostly written in the ascending Kali age. So there are especially astronomical and mathematical errors in these texts. And I know myself as someone who knows the astronomy, when I went back researching all this stuff on the zodiacs, there's a lot of astronomical errors in Srimad Bhagavatam and other things. People don't like hearing this because they see these as Bibles, and it sounds like you're criticizing. It's not a criticism. It's just simply what it is. It's okay. But these are technical sciences. So these technical sciences like astrology, astronomy are going to they have these kind of errors in them. And anybody who's looked into texts know that. So there's nothing unusual about the fact that Yukteswar came in and set it straight. Moss, please.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Most of all of the human blunders and the errors that we see were conceived during the Kali Yugas, either the ascending side or on the descending side. The great epics that were penned really took place during Treta and descending Dwapara, because remember that these traditions going back to the golden age in the Vedic India, they relied on memory, divine memory. They relied on high levels of consciousness where all of these principles and laws were memorized. They didn't have to write things down. The whole tradition was essentially an oral tradition. And because they foresaw this impending dark age, they said, look, we need to write this down. We need to preserve this for these difficult times that are coming so that there is hope for humanity, so that people have a reference and information to guide them through these difficult times. So this is important to realize that consciousness and the level, the collective consciousness, influences the many aspects of life, and particularly the way this tradition continues to evolve. Nothing is fixed. We have to always look at that, is that nothing is fixed, particularly when we're referring to cycles, planets. There are movements, and especially with the Earth, it has a wobble. And so there is a variable factor that we have to consider when looking at all of these calculations, particularly and most importantly, with respects to the whole cycle in itself. So we recognize that, and Yukteswar mentioned that it is a 24,000 year cycle. But many people say he's wrong. The cycle is not 24,000 years. The cycle is really 25,000. I think we're at 25,500, maybe
Yeah,
600.
600. Yeah.
But that is correct at the current rate of precession. But what they didn't realize is that precession is variable. And how you get to 24,000 is you take the average of that movement, of that cycle on the descending side, on the ascending side. And when you average out that rate, you end up with 24,000 years. And the way to understand it is that when two forces come closer together, these balls of energy, if you will, right, in the sky, they're all going around a magnetic center. When things move closer to that center, or when two objects grow closer together, their rate increases. When two objects are further away from each other, it slows down. And this is the binary effect that we see. The sky and the entire cosmology is binary. Things are working in tandem, in a relationship, in partnerships. Planets do this. The sun and the moon do it. The moon and the earth do it around the sun, right? They have their movement. And this is what is fascinating about this. It really provides a sort of, I always refer to it as a map for understanding how life on earth evolves. And this is one more point I'll make relative to this. And this is the difference between science, the way science views creation, and the way the Hindus and the Vedic tradition looks at it. In science, everything is on a linear approach. Everything is looked at it as a straight line. And I often say they refer to us as dumb and illiterate at the beginning of time, caveman, gorilla like. And now we're smart. Now we're evolved. Not in the Vedic cycle. In fact, in the Vedic cycle, our consciousness is low relative to how many more cycles we have and the thousands of years we have ahead of us. Our consciousness is very low right now, and it's slowly increasing. And we don't look at things in a linear way. We look at things in a cyclical way.
Yeah.
Things go up, things go down. And this is where we're at right now. Consciousness is rising. We are slowly beginning to understand the subtle energetic forces that exist. Ether, Wi-Fi, right? And things that didn't make sense to us, right? We needed paper maps for boats to get around, for the Europeans to discover America, right? Everything had to be written down. They didn't use paper even before the palm leaf. They looked at the sky. They understood. They had a knowing, a deep internal knowledge, and were able to intuit how these cycles moved without software, without any devices, except consciousness. And slowly, more and more, these cycles are going to make a lot more sense to us as we continue to expand in our yoga, and as yoga continues to expand and integrate within society. Lifestyle starts to change, the environment and our relationship with the environment starts to change. So it's exciting, and there's so much to this that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Sam?
And the thing to, yeah, thank you. Yeah, beautifully said. And again, the thing to understand about this timeline is that you see on that where it says up at the top 11,500, then Satya, Treta, Dwapara, Kali, that's a descending. That means that we came from the high Satya, then we started to descend from Satya into Treta, which is still very high. Then Dwapara Yuga, this is where that knowledge of the Vedas started to get written down. That's when we started to write the stuff down, was in the Dwapara Yuga first. And in fact, this is also the time of like the Egyptians and even the ancient Greeks, like before 700, there was all of this. We had so much knowledge in that was the descending Dwapara Yuga.
Correct.
And in fact, even right now, we're on the other side of an ascending coming out of Kali, and we're reclaiming that knowledge again that had been, we needed to write it down in the Dwapara Yuga. Then we, like Ma said, because they knew we were going to get really stupid and forget all of this. So we started to write it down, even on degradable materials, and even as imperfect as it might look at times, even with some mistakes in the Vedas and stuff. But then we kept descending more into the Kali Yuga. And again, we understand Kali Yuga is also dark ages in the West as well. It just means dark ages. Yeah. Then we started to come from ascending Kali Yuga was about 500 AD. And this is when like all of the astrology knowledge, for example, this is when like that text that I just showed you for Varahamihira was about 450 AD, which is like right when the Kali Yuga started to ascend again. Varahamihira, for example, was a scholar who came, and all of that knowledge was clunking around from the recent descending Kali age of different types of astrology and cosmology. And what Varahamihira did is he organized it and reset it all back on a scientific bent, and actually went back and corrected those errors from the Vedas, from the Siddhantas, the astronomy. Also, there was this mixing with Greek and Indian, and all of the astrology it wasn't really together. So in the ascending Kali, this is actually what we really started doing, is organizing these sciences so that it wasn't just a mishmash of the recent descending Kali. We started to ascend out of the Kali for about 1,200 years, and then around 1,700, and we can see this in human history. We started to get the age of electricity and etc. Now we're on an ascending Dwapara, looking back like we're doing right now. We're looking back and we can see these mistakes that were made, and we can understand them because we're on the upswing now.
Yep.
And so this is why it makes sense. Go ahead, Mas.
Yeah, a couple of points relative to the descending and the ascending side.
Oh, one more thing really quick. I'm sorry, I
Yeah,
just want to say real
yeah,
quick, is that we had all of that knowledge. We still had the knowledge from the Dwapara. We started to write it down, but and so we're not we aren't inventing knowledge now. We're rediscovering what we knew before. We're rediscovering these sciences again and getting clearer about them. I'm sorry, go ahead.
yes, yeah.
So
And
that
that's
wisdom was
exactly,
there from the rishis. The wisdom was there from the Satya and Treta Yuga, but we
yeah,
were too dumb to see it. So now we're waking up and going back and saying, "See, this is the stuff." Now, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, no, that's exactly the point I wanted to make
Oh, okay.
relative to that. When you look at the two cycles, the descending and the ascending side, the descending side is considered, the arc is considered to be more difficult. Think of this. You're living in a highly evolved way. Societies are communicating telepathically. Your relationship to nature is divine. You see the divine, you feel the divine. The nature becomes sort of a conduit to keep you linked to that divine consciousness. And you're beginning to lose it. And society is starting to lose this divine wisdom, this consciousness. Rather, differently, when you move into the ascending side, you're blind to this. You're ignorant. You just think that everything is great right now. You don't realize how much greater things are going to be. And so the differences in these two arcs are very substantial. It's very important to understand that this is not a time of doom and gloom. This is a time of optimism. This is a time to really rejoice in that the world collectively is growing, expanding in its consciousness. And if you look at the world's religions, right now, we consider that there are five primary religions, including Hinduism, which is the oldest and usually considered the first. I think that there were ritualistic practices and sacred religions that existed prior to it. But in terms of a formalized system, Hinduism was the first, and you have Buddhism and then the Abrahamic traditions. And when you look at these, when were they developed? All within the last 2,500 years. You add up Kali Yuga, 1,200 on the ascending side, 1,200 on the descending side, 2,400 years. We're 300 years into Dwapara Yuga. So that puts us at 2,700 years. That's 200 years just before the birth of Buddha. And now we have religions that develop during these two eras based on individuals following the teaching of specific individuals. But prior to that, religious practices were never based on an individual, they were based on higher intelligence, and intelligence that was passed on through metaphor, through allegory. And even though scriptures like the Yoga Vashista mention flying rockets and airplanes and all of these types of things, it's possible that technology was available then. We don't know because it was so long ago, and most of these ancient civilizations are in ruins like India. So it's really hard to justify that. Science doesn't embrace it because they can't measure it. They want factual evidence. But yet we know that higher intelligence existed. And going to your original point, Sam, with regards to the scriptures and the Rig Veda and these references, Swami Sri Yukteswar wasn't just an individual living in Western India that decided, hey, I'm going to concoct a 24,000 year cycle. The important thing to realize here is that Swami Sri Yukteswar was commissioned by the great Mahavatar Babaji, the Mahamuni Babaji, who has his roots and his links to the great rishis, Agastya and Bogar, and going way back in Vedic history. This individual was made known to the Western world only because Yogananda included a whole chapter on him in his famous autobiography, which was published in 1946. But before that, nobody had any clue who Babaji was, unless you were in some remote village, perhaps in northern Kashmir or northern India somewhere in the Himalayas, and you were part of some small yogic sect. You'd probably heard of him, but the rest of the world never knew of him. And when Babaji commissioned Yukteswar, he said, look, I see that there is a lot of fear in the world, yet we're in a high age. And he was aware of this mathematical error that appeared. He was aware of this. He's aware of everything. And he knew Yukteswar was a great astrologer, and not to mention had Nirvikalpa Samadhi. He was illumined. This is not just somebody who was doing yoga and practicing meditation and on an occasional basis. He was a siddha. He's part of a great siddha tradition. And he wrote that great treatise, The Holy Science, and he explains it there very simply, just as great scriptures were. They weren't elaborate. They didn't explain things in detail. They used sutras, aphorisms, bullet points to say, here it is, because they didn't want the human mind to become so analytical about it. If you look at all of the scriptures, they never provided much detail. Even the Hatha Yoga texts, all the postural texts, they don't go into elaborate detail saying, if you do Ardha Matsyendrasana, the spinal twist, it's going to give some influence to the ascending and the descending colon. They don't explain all of that. But the human mind, the modern mind, becomes so fixated on all of these details. And these are things that they didn't want us to get caught up in. They wanted us to have bhakti, devotion, and to trust that when these illumined masters are trying to guide us out of these dark ages, they do so with great devotion and with great insight. And not to mention, Babaji isn't just correlated to the Yogananda Kriya tradition. He's behind influencing many great yogis in a very obscure way, like Shivananda, even Ramakrishna, and many of these orders, where he helps train these yogis so that they become very evolved and they help to humanity to get out of these dark ages. And one more point before we transition. If you look at the last 150 years or so, 170 years or so, and it's important to understand that even though each yuga has its duration, basically 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and 4,000 years, the extra period is a sandhi, because they say that these things don't happen just immediately. You don't go from one yuga to the next and then suddenly there's a major shift in the world. It takes time. There's a slow rollout, so to speak. Dwapara Yuga happened at 1700, but we can still see effects of Kali Yuga even within Dwapara as we live now. Yes, there are wars. Yes, there is a conquest for power, but they're missing the point. During the last 150 years, as this Kali sort of esque quality starts to rub off on us, all of these great sages start to appear in the world, particularly where? The factory of saints, India. Beginning with who? Rama Krishna. Rama, by no coincidence, he was given the name Ramakrishna. Rama was the great king who was correlated to the solar dynasty. Krishna was the great king, another great avatar, correlated to the lunar dynasty. And so we have this great figure, sage, married, that comes in and says, all religions are a path to divinity. Okay. So there is this very important, all inclusive approach to the Hindu teaching, as opposed to exclusivity and dogma. He says, look, let's be open to all these traditions, find the path that works for you, find the affinity that you may have with divinity, and it's all okay. And so he ushers in this new era, and then boatloads of these great saints. His own disciple makes it to America in his 30s. It took 3 months for him on a boat to get from India to this part of the world. And he was in
You're
California.
talking about Vivekananda, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Swami
So
Vivekananda.
I'm making it so people know what you're talking about. You have to remember, most people don't know these things. So
That's
yeah,
true.
so Vivekananda came over and brought yoga to the West, like in the early 1900s. That was a kind of like initiation of, I'm sorry, the early
Yeah.
19, it was like 1910 or something, right?
Literally, I was actually 1893,
Oh, 1893. Okay, yeah,
late 1800s. And
yeah.
we had many others that many don't know, Ramatirth. And then Yogananda was the first that spent the majority of his life here teaching. And then after some years, they published the Holy Science. And he helped make also many corrections, mistakes, as we've been talking about. All of the world's blunders took place during these dark ages. The Bhagavad Gita was completely misinterpreted. The British criticized and misinterpreted much of the Rig Veda as nature talk, as a bunch of people just worshiping nature and no clue in understanding the deeper insights that existed in these gods that were certainly correlated to forces of nature, but understanding those forces as really divine potentials within every human being. So much confusion was there, and Yogananda spent all of his life here. And remember, his life wasn't so easy and glorious. He struggled in America being here in the 1920s and 30s. And many of you that have seen his film know he went through hell
If I can
trying to.
just come in, yeah. If I could just also just add some
Yeah,
thoughts here as well. And this is why, as you see even on that diagram, that we're in an ascending Dwapar Yuga now, and there are different problems of the ascending Dwapar Yuga. Even when it started, let's say at the age of electricity or so, it seems again we're here in the 21st century. 1700 still seems like a long time ago, and it was. We didn't have automobiles, airplanes, internets, phones, all of this stuff. Now we're actually in a much more. That was the sign that the Kali Yuga was ending, because we weren't in the Dark Ages anymore, even in the West, because the Dark Ages, even in the West, was dominated by feudalism and the church, and everyone died about 30 years old because of any cut. And there was not, we were absolutely like scourging animals, like just trying to survive under feudalism and whatnot.
yeah,
So it's not the same anymore, but now we're several hundred years away. And we have different problems in the Dwapar Yuga. So we got to get out of this idea that, oh, but things are still so bad. It's still the Kali Yuga. And just this mindless kind of, this is the thing that I run into that just gets draining, folks. Come on. Let's not forget, okay? This is not
correct.
the Dark Ages, okay? And things are bad, etc. But we have different problems in the Dwapar Yuga, which actually relates to a lot of the things that Moss is saying. Back in the Dark Ages, we didn't have access to anything. We didn't have access to any information. Nobody knew about Vedas or saints or any of this stuff during all of that Kali Yuga time. We didn't have access to even books. Nobody could read. You have to remember, these are dark ages. And
Yes.
so now we have different problems. And the way I see the Dwapara Yuga problems are more the kinds of things we're looking at now. They would have loved to have the problems we have where we argue on the internet over ideas.
Correct.
Now our problems in the Dwapara Yuga are misinterpreting things, the confusion of having too much, having so much information and stimulation without the proper discrimination and brain to organize it, to filter through it. And again, during the Dark Ages, they didn't have any information. Now, again, on some level, it was also a simpler time where there was a more direct connection to consciousness as well. There was a clarity, but it was born out of ignorance of a more sophisticated potential. Now
Yeah.
we have so much potential that we don't really, our problem is really discrimination, is overwhelm. Even if you go back 100 years to 1920, it seems like it's a whole different world. So this exponential curve, again, this is the ascending Dwapara Yuga.
Correct. One of the things that I feel is the clearest point that we are in the ascending age. When you look at the development of allopathic medicine, Western approach to medicine, which pretty much happened in the last couple hundred years, it has its roots in older medicine, but we can see it in lifespan. It's interesting because I'm doing a lot of research right now for my PhD, specifically on this topic of longevity. And in the Ayurvedic text, it references, which was the main text, the Charaka Samhita, references the Yugas. And it says, okay, during this Kali Yuga, okay, so 2,300 years, they were right at, we do the math, 1,200 plus 1,200, 1,200 on the ascending side, 1,200 on the descending side. That puts us right at 2,400 years ago. So the Ayurvedic texts were right at the brink of this kind of Dwapara Kali shift. And they said, during this period, humans should on average live 100 years. In the Dwapara, 200 years. The lifespan in Treta, 300 years, and the lifespan in Satya, 400 years. So consciousness is correlated to lifespan. The longer that we live, the more expansive our consciousness, and vice versa. The more expansive our consciousness, the longer we live. So what we're seeing now, as Sam mentioned, that look, just a couple hundred years ago, people were dying at 30 years of old. You're old. The median lifespan was about 30 to 40 years.
Yeah, everyone died at 30 or 40 of a cut and all their teeth rotten and living a life. It's not just dying, but pain. Again, they didn't have toothbrushes. Like people's teeth fell out when they rotted. People lived in constant pain and struggle, trying not to get even the simplest illness and they were slaves. Everyone was a slave. You lived under feudal masters, and it was a savage world. We were basically almost like animals. And the church was the organizing influence. For all of those years. I did want to just say, though, here, just as we get around the end here, that, you on these slides, Mas, you also made some great points. I wonder if you wanted to go back, like the 24,000 Yuga cycle can be like considered a macro of the 24-hour day. And again, you also put things here. We use mobile phones, computers, because of Dwapara Yuga. Again, these are all very sophisticated tools. They're built on a kind of caveman mentality still. That's why the access that we have to all of the spiritual technologies of yoga, Ayurveda is much more important than the physical technologies. Because again, the thing about it is these technologies that came in from the Treta Dwapara Yuga, where all of these texts were written, where the Vedas were written, where the knowledge that was conveyed in all of the yogic scriptures, that's where the knowledge came from. It came from the Treta Dwapara or the Satya Treta Dwapara. That's where the knowledge came. Then we wrote it down. We're getting access to it again. But we're getting access to it from the mind of someone who's just woken up out of the dark ages. It's like we've just woken up out of a deep sleep. And we're
Right.
seeing this stuff, and it's very easy to misinterpret it. This is the biggest thing that
Correct.
people like me deal with all the time is, again, and it's not to be insulting, but it's just that to try to convey that, first of all, we've forgotten that we're not the body, that we're not the flesh, that we're not the time on earth, we're not the karma, we're the spirit. The more we forget that, the more we're going to forget everything, because that's the first thing to remember. Once
Yeah.
you remember that, and you keep remembering it through sadhana, spiritual practice, it's not an idea that you remember. Oh yeah, I know that. That's not it. It's not about knowing it. That's a belief. You maybe believe that you're this, but knowing it means that you're living it. It means that it's an experience. You know the self, and you know yourself as spirit, and you have to keep reminding yourself every day. That's what sadhana is. That's what spiritual practice is, because it's not thoughts in your head that believes you're spirit. That's just another, in some ways, that's just another grasping, clutching mechanism where it's, oh, I believe I'm spirit, so it's the golden age. Again, it's a kind of mechanism that creates this, the clutching we were talking about. Once you do sadhana and practices like we see in these texts of that enlightened time, then that spiritual technology becomes the basis. And then the outer technologies don't produce as much illusion. And
Yes.
again, I'm going to
That's
bring Moz
brilliant.
in here. Yeah.
That's a brilliant point. The spread of yoga, Ayurveda, and Jyotish globally is not a Kali Yuga phenomenon. That is a Dwapara Yuga phenomenon. The use of this cell phone is a technology device developed during the Dwapara Yuga, and it's going to continue to increase. Artificial intelligence, driverless cars, space annihilating rockets and planes where you can travel across the world instead of hours, minutes from one side of the world to the other. So it's a very auspicious time to celebrate that we have these great wisdom traditions accessible to us, that we can practice them. And one important note is that there was a study, number of studies I've looked at, but relative to religious practices, and people were asked, do you consider yourself religious? The majority of people that are asked today, if they're asked this question, say, no, I am spiritual. I have a connection to nature. And we see people detaching themselves from the religions that were developed during the Dark Ages and identifying with self power, individual power. I have that consciousness within me. I am the soul that is within me. I have a connection to the divine because I go hiking, because when I'm in nature, I feel connected to the divine. When I meditate, and these practices are all empowering people. And another point on the financial side, we're moving from currencies that were based on metals like gold and silver and trinkets. These are the things we were trading. Now the gold is becoming digitized. We're looking at things like Bitcoin as a digital gold. And this is giving people individual power to hold their own assets. It's empowering people. And this is what this higher age represents. You are the power. The government isn't going to save you. A better insurance and health care plan isn't going to save you. You are going to save yourself. And this is what Dwapara is beginning to awaken in all of us. And thankfully, we had these great lineages and these great gurus, Amachi, Yogananda, Vivekananda, Jyotirmayananda, Shivananda, on, that are here now reminding us in this new age, find your way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and again, but we have to be careful because again,
Yeah.
I heard what you were saying, and I was waiting if there was going to be a turn because there's for me, I also see the turn because exactly even the things we're talking about, it's like you're the power, but people hear this as me, this person in this body who's incarnated and my money, and we see that I'm the power is like me, this person in this body with this karma who has a mind to figure it all out myself and my own spirituality. This is often how that this is the danger in the Dwapara of how
Yeah,
it's
that's
interpreted. It's you as self connecting with the teachings is great, but again, we tend this is the problem of the Dwapara. Like I said, I'll just go back and repeat it. The problem is that we're overwhelmed with so much. And again, even things, even when people say they're spiritual but not religious, so much of that spirituality, and again, I'm not saying it isn't, but it revolves around, first of all, mostly our psychology.
yeah.
And everybody knows they're not the body. Everyone can agree, right? I know I'm not my body, but I'm how I feel. And I just want to feel good all the time. So I'm doing things that help me feel good. That's not the self. Those are emotions. They're part of the karmic body. That's basically called ego. Body,
Yes.
mind, how you feel about everything. It's called kama. And again, the Bhagavad Gita is a battlefield between kama and dharma, doing what you feel like because you think it's going to make you happy, and identifying with the separate emotions, body, life experience, which is just called karma, or knowing the self, which is beyond that. And so, again, this is the danger and the problem of the Dwapara Yuga is
Yeah,
that
no,
how
it's
we
still,
define ourselves is the issue because we have access to so much information and the mind can spin anything. The ego, I should say, can spin anything toward misunderstanding and confirmation bias.
yeah.
And we're
No,
just creating more engines now with online and AI and to create that. By the way, I
complexity.
wasn't contradicting you at all, my friend. I was
No,
just
no,
saying
I
that
get it. No, you're right.
that what you said is one part, and I also am saying this is the other part as well. Go ahead.
No, it's a dark age. We're still in a very dark age. We're at the
Well, like what I
bottom.
said, just real quick, that we have
Yeah,
the Dwapara potential built upon the Kali mentality. We're still like this mind that is still foraging in the field. Everything is based on this kind of, not everything, but so much is based on this kind of fear and this need to survive as an
yeah,
entity. Yet we have access to all of this information. So this is why it's the ascending Dwapara, because
yeah,
it's like ascending from the dark ages where we're sitting on top of all this technology and
yeah,
all of this information that they just never had access to before. They never saw
yeah,
this stuff. And there
yeah,
was a reason why these, without getting much longer, but there's a reason why these teachings were also guarded. They didn't teach it to everybody. Now, this is one of the biggest things that I see also about Dwapara is that the genie's let out of the bottle. There's no more protection of the Vedas, and we don't want this to fall into the wrong hands. It's already in the wrong. It's in everybody's hands now, and the genie's out of the bottle. Pandora's box has been opened for good or ill. You can't put it back in. And so
yeah,
again, they guarded against this in those other ages because they didn't want it to be misused. Now it's already out there. So again, it's the same issue. What
yeah,
do these things mean? Because you could say spirituality, you can say self, the self, and people like me, the person who's going to get up and go eat dinner, the
yeah,
self. No,
yeah.
that's not what it
No,
means.
no, yeah. There's still a lot of confusion, and I've often said that relative to yoga. There's a lot of yoga teaching out there, but unless ultimately you're really connecting to a lineage based tradition that has a link to the deeper teachings and the higher dharma, be careful because everybody's reinventing yoga and they're putting their name before yoga. And this is something to be very careful with. We don't need to reinvent yoga. We don't need to rename yoga. It was established during the high ages, and the practices are complete. The practices work. They take you to that goal, but you have to really find an authentic teacher and, yes, question it and question the source of the information that you're getting from. We have to do that, especially during this age of overload, information overload. You're right. It is a very dark age. We're still at the very bottom of a 2000 plus year cycle, and we have a long way to go. And I thought, Sam, you might make a couple of points that we can end on this. we've got this solstice coming up, this eclipse coming up, and there's many of them. And there's also this big planetary pileup in Pisces, and people are constantly looking at these periods, and there's many of them, and they say, this is the one that's really going to break us into the new spheres. And we have to understand that there are many of these periods. They come, there's many more to come. Yes, they can have an impactful effect on our lives, but we have to take this in a relative way. We have to really look at it on an individual basis, not just on a macro basis. And
Those of
again,
us who've been practicing for a long time, and it's why I wanted
yeah,
to include these bios as well. This ain't my first time of eclipses in Pisces or even Saturn going through Pisces or whatever. I've been doing this a while, right? And it's not the age of Aquarius either. Sorry, guys, it's a few hundred years away. We can measure it, we can track it, we can see when the vernal equinox is going to happen in Aquarius. Right now, it's about 6 degrees Pisces. We got about 350. So again, these are very important things. And again, like I say, we're in an ascending cycle, and with that there's a lot of potential, but we have the problems of the Dwapara Yuga are the problems of discrimination, of confusion, of arrogance, of the ego mistaking itself to be the self. Oh yes, me, that, and mistaking and confusing these teachings. Confusion is the biggest problem of the Dwapara Yuga. Confusion,
yeah,
not clarity, is confusion, and the ego, the confirmation bias of the ego, because the ego is very subtle and we don't see it. That's why we need to connect with the self. When you connect with the self, can perceive the ego. Just like we were looking at the scriptures, the self can perceive the errors of the ego. The self sees the ego, and if we don't connect with the self, if we don't surrender and embrace clarity, stillness, and that which is beyond the ego, we don't even see it. And so again, that lesson of Pisces is that lesson of surrender, letting go. And underneath it all too, Moss, you said this, the real thing that makes it happen is bhakti, is devotion. It's not just enough to do meditation. Now, the ego wants to do meditation if we get something out of it. I do my practices every day because I feel good. I feel good when I do it. I feel good. Again, everything is emotional. But when it's devotional and you love the teachings, you love the guru, there's love. Think of what you'll do for who you love. We just heard Moss's dog barking. Nandi, I met him. Beautiful dog. Moss will do anything for that dog because there's love. There's no effort. Nandi poops on the floor. Nandi does this stuff. Okay, I'll do anything. Love, where there's love, there's no effort.
yes,
Where there's love for God, which is called devotion, atma prema, when there's love of truth, there's no effort. You don't have to force yourself to meditate. Oh, I know I can't meditate. Oh, that's because there's no love there. There's no love. And that's why a guru is such a blessing, because then meditation isn't a job. You love it because you love the guru. You love the teachings. And then it's effortless. There's no effort.
yeah. Babaji, in one of his sublime quotes, says it's ultimately love that will heal this world.
Leonard Cohen said, love is the engine of survival. It's a beautiful quote. I never forgot it.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad that we're closing up with this theme of love, and we offer our pranams to our own great gurus and our deep love for them, Yogananda and Amma, and so many lineages, Shivananda, Jyotirmayananda, all of them, for their great unconditional love that has helped us to share this. We share this first and foremost out of love for humanity, and it helps us as we share this. It helps people, but it also helps us. We grow and we evolve, and so let
And in
us
the
all be
spirit of my brotherly love for you
Thank
is
you.
real, and I want to make sure people know how to get in touch with you. And honestly, folks, you want to align with Vidal and his great teachings, Dancing Shiva, More Life Market. Moss, what would you like to, any big things coming up that you wanted to talk about as well, or just how people can get in touch with you? I'll have your links as well.
Yeah, as I often say, study Ayurveda. It's important. Why? Because we need to learn how to live. Yoga alone is not enough. Okay. Yogis often beat up their bodies. They don't do things that are balanced for their bodies. Yoga and Ayurveda were born together to help us. Just as the sun and moon are always together, moving around each other, bringing balance to our planet, we need yoga and Ayurveda to help us to keep that balance and to grow and to evolve. Study Ayurveda, practice yoga, and let the divine take care of the rest.
Wonderful. On that note, I want to thank you all for watching and attending, and especially thank you, Mas, for your sharing your insight and wisdom. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. Pleasure. Namaste. Hari Om.
Please find me on YouTube at Sam Jeppy, Vedic Astrology Teacher. On there since 2007, thousands of hours of classes. Also on Facebook at Astrology Teacher, tons of articles updated regularly. And I'm on Instagram at Vedic Astrology 108, ongoing updates and interaction. For a limited time, I'm offering 10 hours of masterclasses, Yoga and Vedic Astrology, Quantum Vedic Astrology, and Spiritual Astrology Masterclass. These are 3 great courses that will really help you a lot. Now, in case you don't know who I am, I taught the Astraved certification course, Dattatreya Shiva Baba, in 2010. Ravi Shankar published my book in 2018. I've been around for decades. I've been teaching these great classes, and if you go to VedicAstrologyEssentials.com, you can get this 90% off discount of these 3 great classes, more than 10 hours, guaranteed value. You can check this out. These 3 classes will give you all the necessary tools to begin to learn Vedic astrology. Please find me on YouTube at Sam Jeppy, Vedic Astrology Teacher. On there since 2007, thousands of hours of classes. Also on Facebook at Astrology Teacher, tons of articles updated regularly. And I'm on Instagram at Vedic Astrology 108, ongoing updates and interaction.